When it comes to sustainability and renewable energy, it's definitely a factor. But I think, if we were to be fair and honest, it's probably the second priority. First one is, can I get a connection? Can I get the power supply?
Supply chain is the biggest concern with so many deployments worldwide happening. Everybody, all the manufacturers are busy in supplying to these deployment sites.
It's become this whole thing, future-ready data center. How much crystal ball gazing can one do when everything changes every minute? You watch W.Media Deep Dive, our exclusive video podcast series center industry and connectivity ecosystem across South Asia and the Middle East. I'm your host, Deborah Grey, editor-in-chief at W.Media, and today we are taking a deep dive into a very exciting topic, building the digital backbone, real estate and project management challenges in data center development. Joining us today to discuss this exciting subject are two industry leaders, Colm Shorten, Head Data Center Development, JLL, and Himmath Mohammed, Chief Information Officer, the Hub. Welcome to W.Media, gentlemen. How are we doing today?
Good afternoon, Deborah. It's a pleasure to see you again and connect over this amazing subject of data centers.
Yeah, likewise. Good afternoon, Deborah. Delighted to be here. Happy to join in this conversation with Himmath, and looking forward to a nice discussion.
Thank you. It's wonderful to have you on the show. Now, for those of our viewers who are just joining us or who are just discovering you, you're both industry veterans, but we'd like you to tell us a little bit about your professional journey so far and also a little bit about your organizations, 2 minutes each.
My name is Mohammed Himmath. I am the Chief Information Officer at Gulf Data Hub, one of the pioneers in data centers in Middle East. With more than 12 years of operations, currently we are catering to all the hyperscalers in the Middle East. And the journey has been amazing. And when we started with mere 1 megawatt of data center capacity. And currently we are operating at 90 megawatts. And as we speak, another 100 megawatts is under construction. And it is the best place to be there in the current situation. And we thank for the technology for that perspective.
Yeah, Colm Shorten, I head up data centers in MEA, Middle East and Africa for JLL. JLL offer a full set of solutions for data center asset lifecycle, whether it's in finance, debt or equity, whether it's in strategic consulting, design, operate, and also dispose of assets. We're probably, more than 20 years in the Middle East. We have over 700 people in the GCC, and we cover all aspects of data centers, whether it's working with enterprise, retail or wholesale, hyperscale, or strategic because of our relationships with the government. I'm a veteran, as you quite rightly said, Deborah. I'm over 35 years in data centers. I've had the opportunity to work for Fujitsu. I'm fundamentally a semiconductor engineer, and I follow the philosophy of chip, rack, room when it comes to data centers. I spent almost 20 years with IBM. I'm now 5 years with JLL, traditionally working out of Europe, supporting the US, our headquarters in Chicago. And I'm delighted to move here very recently to build on the original success that we have, primarily focused on data centers.
Thank you so much for those introductions, gentlemen. Let's now dive right into our first segment, acquiring powered land. My first question is for you, Himmath. What are the specifications you have in mind when you set out to look for land to build your data centers?
Well, that's a good way to start, Deborah. Yes, land is very critical and essential part of data centers. Where you choose, how you are positioned, is there a scope for future expansions? So it's no more just a square foot of land, but it's more you can call as a smart land, where you have to see for whether the power grid availability is there, whether fiber connectivity is there, whether there is a scope for the future demand to accommodate in the same land parcel, and proximity to business hubs, accessibility to this land parcels. These are very critical aspects when you try to choose for a land for building data centers.
I see. What are your clients telling you, Colm? What do they look for?
Yeah, I think, Hamid has covered a lot of the fundamentals. What we're finding is that it depends on two things. One is the type of data center that you wish to build. So what we're seeing right now and we're experiencing in the market is that there is a lot of development, very much aligned to what Gulf Data Hub are building, which is around the cloud infrastructure satisfying their client requirements. We're also seeing in parallel, particularly with the recent growth, and I'd say supercharged growth in AI, where there is a demand for AI, GPU, machine learning facilities. But fundamentally, the subtle difference between the two sites are one is when you build cloud infrastructure, like Himmath says, you look for proximity, you consider fiber routes, you look at latency, you look obviously at power availability. If you don't have power, it's very difficult to make the land parcel work. And that power, in the case of cloud, we bring the power to the land, to the data center, circled around an availability zone or proximity for latency. Whereas on the other side, if we think of the large visionary incentives and initiatives that we see today, whether it's Stargate or Humane, these large projects, they're slightly different where you bring those data centers to the power. They're not so much latency dependent. However, they are super power hungry. And then the typical requirements are probably common for both, where you look at zoning, regulation, geographical, whether it's environmental, soil factors, or even geological, like earthquakes. And then you also look for scalability, that is there sufficient footprint for growth, that if I build one data center or one module, that I can expand in order to face and match the demand.
What I'm curious about, though, is do you have to jump through any bureaucratic hoops? Are there any hurdles you face in the initial process itself while you're getting necessary permissions, even before you start building a data center? Himmath, what have you experienced?
Yeah, that's a bit a political question, but yes, we need to answer as much as diplomatically we can. Yes, even before you break the ground, you are running through a lot of processes of interacting with municipalities, with utilities, getting those permits, those your design, getting approvals, civil defense approvals, clearances. Yes, these are the usual stuff in any country, in any project. We have to go through it. Yes, but you learn, and the problem is most of these authorities are not acquainted with data center perspective or outlooks per se. So they don't understand the criticality of it, the redundancy part of it. They will keep challenging you. Why do you need dual feeds? Why do you need extra power? Why do you need, these are usual routine discussions we have with utilities. But over the year now, as the data centers have become more predominant in the market, people understand the need of these data centers, need of having those infrastructures in place. That's why now they are a bit more flexible and more cooperative.
Colm, your clients are also, I'm sure, going through this. How do you advise them? How do you handhold them through this whole turbulent process, even before this, as Himmath says, break ground?
Yeah, I think traditionally, to be diplomatic, traditionally this was a challenge, because of the demands, and these facilities are very power hungry. There was often some misunderstanding about these data centers as big black, dark, or grey boxes. But as people started to become more familiar with digital transformation and digital technology, and particularly the value and the return on that investment, and how it can actually improve this life of the citizens of these countries, it became a little bit less erroneous or taxing. Now, also, there was some initial debate or conversation around where do we go? Do we go to specific zoned areas that would have incentives, whether it's tax or some other incentive, in order to be there? There is that conversation, as Himmath pointed out, where you have to talk to the municipality, explain what the requirement is and why it should be here and not here. And it is typical. It's not quite what I'd call NIMBYism, in the sense nobody wants a data center in their backyard. And often people were applying regulations that you would have very similar to building industrial units or towers or blocks, whereas this asset class is a little bit different. It has certain nuances that we needed to have that conversation. I think right now most people are educated. It's not quite as difficult as it was, but it does still face similar building permits, environmental impact assessments, as well as some regulatory requirements from specific municipalities that do differ.
Hemant, a short while ago, you were also talking about power, and I want to come back to that. Is it difficult to source power, especially renewable energy? And also, are you facing challenges in transmission of power from the plant or the source to your data center?
See, sourcing power itself is a challenge. Coming to renewable energy, it is a much bigger challenge. Yes, see, renewable, the main thing is transmission. Generation might be there, but transmission of this power from a grid to the site might not be available most of the times. So you have to cater in your critical path that 200 kilometers of cable laying on multiple contractors who will be executing. So that's very critical and challenging. And coming to renewable energies, it's still developing market, and there are regulatories in place in Dubai and UAE, especially to cater. You can have renewable energy sources uh, in your campus, feeding directly to your facilities, but you still are not yet mature at that global markets that you have a net metering or direct agreements with grid that you generate in a desert a big solar farm and feed it to the grid, and you can net it off with what you're consuming with the grid itself. So that level of openness still is not achieved in here, but I think soon we will be seeing those dates, especially with COP28 and all these regulations coming in. We expect much wider renewable energy providers in place here so that we can have PPA agreements here.
But conversations are taking place, right? This is in the works, would you say?
Yes, there is certain progress, and we see it will be much open in the coming years.
I see. Colm, what are your clients saying? Are they also facing the same hurdles in sourcing power?
Yeah, I think power is definitely the big key driver. As I'd mentioned earlier, again, it depends on which type of data center and what scale of power that you need. But to echo my colleague's sentiments, we think generation is probably not the key issue, but for sure transmission and distribution of that power. We have a lot of power, but it's probably in the wrong place. When it comes to sustainability and renewable energy, it's definitely a factor. But I think, if we were to be fair and honest, it's probably the second priority. First one is, can I get a connection? Can I get the power supply? Or even as alluded to earlier, I need two feeds. Environmental is definitely a key factor, particularly for the large operator in hyperscale who have already made pre-commitments and sustainability commitments. So that becomes a challenge, particularly when you think of the environment and the temperatures. But also, what we're finding is even if we build solar farms, wind is probably not quite as attractive based on the data and the stats. There then becomes an issue with regard to connecting that to the grid or the conversation around long duration battery storage because the sun might shine in the day, it's not that good at night, so we got to figure out how to store the energy. And then once we get it to the grid, how do we get it to the data centers? And that's why I'm thinking, yes, we have power, it's not in the right place. We have to spend a bit more time, effort and energy in distribution and transmission in order to bring that power to the right place.
I mean, to add to that, Colm, off late, we are seeing these challenges hampering our aggressive expansion plans and meeting the deadlines. AI is demanding a lot of power and deployments to be in very short time. So what ADH initiative, what we have is we started to plan and got approvals from these utility providers to build our own substations next to our campuses in order not to lose that time in pulling the power from grid, which is consuming a longer time periods.
Makes perfect sense because in order to head and future proofing exactly what government do, you have to be ahead of the curve. The lead times, as Deborah alluded to, the demand and the lead times are getting compressed. So you need to be thinking ahead of the curve and have that infrastructure in place and not waiting for it. If you don't preempt that demand, it just decides and puts a lot of pressure. Even you may possess a disadvantage from competitive standpoint. So I would agree with that philosophy. That's what we're finding, that the operators are taking that step. And it's also working in partnership and collaboration with the power companies, with the grid providers, because it makes sense.
I heard many of the or many peers like Europe and other regions, if there is abundant of gas resources are there, they are building their gas plants next to their sites so that they can feed direct power into their sites without any interruptions.
So are you also considering building your own captive power units like a solar power plant or something? Because I mean, it is, the Middle East, it's blessed with sunshine. Yes, it's difficult to like store it, but still that appears to be like the most, I'm not sure if I can call it low-hanging fruit, but are you considering building your own captive solar power
See,
plant?
we love to build those solar energy plants, PV plants next to our campuses. But unfortunately, what happens is uh, these data center locations, land parcels, are in very prime locations. Almost 1 square kilometer of land can only generate not even 2-3 megawatts of power. Which means you need to have large prime land where you deploy, feed it directly to your data centers. So the challenge what we are seeing, I mean, have abundant sunlight, abundant land in remote places where you can deploy and feed it to the grid, and you do a net metering with your utility provider, basically. So that is not yet been initiated. I think if that comes in coming future, that will be for all the in the region.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the concept that renewable is definitely durable. But right now, the focus is on, can I provide power? And if we look at the key energy source, it is fundamentally around gas or carbons now. But there is a global transition from a climate change. But basically, energy security leads to economic security, which fundamentally drives climate security. The current thinking is that is more it's more green oil or coal transition towards those power units are on site behind the grid, either through a PPA, a power purchase agreement, or in order to support, and sometimes not necessarily in the Middle East, in BC, but definitely in Europe, you have grid participation. You'll see it in London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin, where the grid is so stressed that it needs assistance. Then you find that there is a shift at a global level, given that demand for AI, where we're now shifting 30, 50, 70 megawatt buildings or facilities to 100 megawatt, multiple 100 megawatt, or even gigawatt campuses. That means we need a paradigm shift. We need to move to something else. And that brings in the conversation either about pumped hydro or hydrogen or small modular reactor. That step is coming down. Well, what we're finding is that the partners who are coming into the Middle East, whether it's an Amazon, a Microsoft, a Google, Meta, Oracle, they are all working on SMRs. At the moment, it's fundamentally driven out of America. It's starting to gain traction in Europe. It's only a matter of time that APAC and GCC will catch on to it. The technology is a little bit more advanced than people would have said, but there is a need, and in order to bring these in, regulation may take 5 to 7 years, but it also takes 5 to 7 years to build a power plant. It may take 5 to 7 years to build SMRs, but it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Also, I think, I mean, there is another thing that plays a role in this, and that is permits from, the regulators. How much time, or more importantly, how enthusiastic are they to give permission for such renewable energy projects? Moreover, in the long term, does it deliver the ROI, that you have in mind? Because clearly you have to justify this to your chief financial officers as well.
Yeah, I would think it does. I mean, at the end of the day, it's fundamentally a business. There is a measure of ROI. The common currency globally is money, and people want a return on that investment, and we shouldn't shy away from that. People are not going to run a business at a loss. However, what I would say, if you look at the combined renewable energy, particularly in areas where we have wind farms, we have solar farms, we have pumped hydro, we have geothermal like in Africa, and if you look at the combined renewable energy, the cost of energy is coming down. Just like one of the key incentives for coming to the Middle East is the cost of a kilowatt of energy. Of course, when we have geopolitical issues and stresses on gas pipelines, it puts pressure on that. But also the opposite side, if you have wind farms, which work at night and offset when you have solar farms, and for sure, like you said, Deborah, the Middle East is a perfect location for solar farms, hence why we have some of the largest projects in the region. But the cost of renewable energy is becoming a positive and not a negative.
For sure, Colm, I agree with you. And the ROI is for real, but it's a bit slower. But once it can be better with the combination of a storage system, BES or something, where you generate power through solar and you store it and reutilize it as when you require.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I'd mentioned long duration storage systems. If we use
Yeah,
BESS, if we use battery energy storage systems, they will give you
correct.
some element of power or they give you some coverage. When you think of the architecture and the structure of a data center design, we're fundamentally using batteries as backup. We use them as backup for UPS that if we lose the main feed or the utility would then the battery supports that grid while the generator, the secondary feed, fires up. If we can get battery storage and advanced batteries, beyond lead or lithium into solid oxide fuel cells and get a longer duration, then I think that's where we will see the acceleration in sustainability, because you'll have the ability to store that energy and use it at the right time in the right place.
All right, gentlemen, with that, let's move on to our next segment, which deals with project management challenges. My question here is, given how rapidly AI is evolving as a technology, and it is clearly having an impact on how we are building our data centers, how are data center owners and operators coping with these ever-changing demands and pressures which have been put on you now because of AI?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's a $1 million question,
yeah,
Deborah. Uh, Basically, we are designing for the unpredictability. These AI systems are rapidly changing. Each chipset is coming out with a different different requirement in terms of power consumption, different in terms of cooling capacities. And now we are talking of hybrid cooling where air and liquid cooling is being mixed. So yeah, I mean it's the data center designs are rapidly changing, and you cannot assume for future, but you can be very agile and flexible in your designs, which can accommodate these future demands.
In that case, I mean, Colm, would you say it's possible to build a future-ready data center? It's become this whole thing, future-ready data center.
Yeah.
How much crystal ball gazing can one do when everything changes every minute?
yeah. It's a challenge, no doubt. And I think where that brings project management techniques into play is more around collaboration. Of course, project management has traditionally been about time, cost, quality, and different critical path analysis. But when you're trying to build for, an ever-changing environment, sometimes we refer to it as VUCA, where it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and there's a lot of ambiguity. However, what I would say is if we apply a more intelligent approach and we look, as Himmath talked about, different semiconductors, one of the key things in designing data centers is to look at the semiconductor from a TDP, a thermal design power, or sometimes called thermal design point. How many
Yeah.
watts are going to be on that device? That drives then the equation, how many kilowatts are going to be in the rack. And as Himmath referred to, is agility and flexible cooling methodology. So what we're finding now is you are building the overall envelope based on a direction of travel or what the landing zone looks like for my existing customer for the next 2 to 4 years. But it's also driving the agile agility into the design, that the design becomes modular. So it's modular. So from a project management, you're fabricating off-site and you're delivering modules on skids. And those
Yes.
modules may change in design to suit whatever that workload or demand is, whether it's air cooling, whether it's air with liquid to chip, whether it's air with liquid to chip with rear door heat exchanger, and that constant changing battle while you're still getting pressured for supply chain and to meet RFS dates. So it's interesting to say the least.
So,
Yeah,
Himmath,
especially the RFS date, that's the key point here, Colm, which you mentioned. Uh, with these heavy demand and rush to deploy these AI capabilities, uh, we have to think out of the box, prefabricate something offsite, bring it to the site, pre-assemble it, and test it and commissioning. That's the way it's more, agile and fast deployments can help and work out.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, to me, what I see the positive side of it is it's driven that collaboration, because the RFS date, the ready for service date, doesn't move. And there may be even penalties that if you miss that date,
Penalties,
because
exactly.
you've signed up to that commitment, which means the supply
Yeah.
chain, the partnership between the M&E design, the equipment OEM manufacturers, they have to work tightly together, because we're all in this as one team in order to drive success and to meet those ever challenging dates.
Yeah. True.
Supply chain disruptions, geopolitics, all these ground realities. Are there other management challenges you are facing while project, or is this for now? Is your plate already full, or is there more coming in?
No, I think
No,
there
we
are.
haven't touched the biggest challenge.
Poor
We
Vedanta.
haven't touched the biggest challenge, which is the supply chain. Supply chain is the biggest concern with so many deployments worldwide happening. Uh, Everybody, all the manufacturers are busy in supplying to these deployment sites. It's becoming really challenge how they distribute their manufacturing, logistics, delivering on the site, testing and commissioning. And there is always, apart from that, you have the resources who will go test, commission these sites. I mean, these are critical systems. You need high-end skilled professionals to commission these. So these are biggest challenges, I believe, which comes as top one, two, and three categories.
Yeah, I would not disagree. I think the supply chain is definitely a key issue as to where you're sourcing either the long lead items or the critical equipment. The skills and the staff required to do that, given the overall global demand, is quite significant. And then also, when you look at those supply chains, a lot of it is there's a demand by the large hyperscale, who's a quite hungry animal, and they suck up a lot of those materials. So those long lead items leak back into your critical path and your delivery dates. So trying to make all that happen, what I envisage is a lot of that manufacturing capability, which may have been aligned to more traditional tier one large markets, is beginning to shift. We can't be shipping parts from America or North Europe into the Middle East. We got to be making them here. And we're seeing that
Correct.
transition. They're
Very
going to come
rightly
up out
said.
of the ground. Yeah.
Very rightly said, Tom. That's very critical to bring in all these manufacturers into these countries where they can have faster manufacturing and deployments. Correct.
Both of you have been speaking very passionately about liquid cooling as well, and I believe adoption in the Middle East is increasing. But how easy or difficult is it to actually, install and operate effective heat management and cooling technologies in such a hot geography? Because it's probably the hottest place in the planet.
Yeah, it's
Of course. Go
it,
ahead,
it's
Tom.
yeah, it's interesting because I look out the window and I look at the weather here, and some people call it quite beautiful and some call it quite brutal. But in essence, there's something that's happened though in the technology roadmap of data centers is that we've gone closer to liquid cooling, closer to closed loop systems. I'm not saying that we still don't have to reject the heat, but when we bring into liquid cooling, that liquid cooling unit, if we're talking about liquid to chip or eventually immersive, I believe, and some people get emotional about it. I believe immersive is not yet, albeit liquid to chip cooling combined with rear door heat exchanger is the current converged solution for cooling. But if just like we have in the Nordics, for example, where we have district heat, where we're using the waste heat, we also, and I've seen recently, Riyadh, where we have district cooling. There are clever ways and innovative technologies we can apply. Whereas just relying purely on air cooling, well, then that scenario that Deborah, that you're pointing to, how could we do air cooling in an environment that has an ambient temperature above 35 degrees and your inlet
45.
temperature is, yeah, 45 even, but your inlet temperature is somewhere between 18 and 25. So liquid cooling will help solve the problem rather than exacerbate it.
And also, I mean, what GDH does is we understand these harsh weathers deeply, and we use closed water loops instead of, that will really impact and help us in water consumption.
There's no doubt. I mean, water here is probably more expensive than gasoline,
That's,
but
yes.
closed loop systems for sure are going to help alleviate any area that has stressed water stress.
If you were on a bit of a tangent, just thinking about out of the box solutions, what do you think can be done with all the heat that is generated? How do you think it can be utilized in the Middle
Yeah,
East?
it's a great question, and when we think about it, when we harvest the energy, so when we think of district heating, one of the benefits and spin-offs is that we're getting higher grade temperatures coming out of the data center. That heat can be transformed through heat exchangers into energy, and then again you're reusing that energy. So again, using innovative technology, once you capture that heat, you can direct that heat and convert that heat into energy, which can be reused in a different format or a different phase, whether it's in liquid or gas, but it can be reused, that energy.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple ways. The other day, I was talking to one gentleman from Norway, where they are planning to use this heat coming out of data centers to farm algae, which can be converted as a protein source for salmon farming.
Yeah.
So there are many innovative ways people are trying to use these and heat dissipating from data centers in multiple locations.
Thank you so much for that. All right, with that, now let's dive into our third and final segment, which is regulatory reforms. And my question is, what kind of regulatory support do you already have, and what more can be done to improve and ease the process of building digital infrastructure?
Yeah, see, as I mentioned earlier, there has been significant improvisation in communicating to all entities, especially in like Dubai, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. They have been very proactive. They have been, if you see in Saudi Arabia, there is a lot of power subsidies for data center providers. Uh, the one thing I can suggest is there should be a collaborative effort between all these entities, building a common, platform where we can address all the developers, data center developers, can address and share equally.
Colin, what kind of collaborative environment would you like to see?
Yeah, again, I would agree. And I think to be fair, we've seen more progress in the last 2 years than probably we had in the last 10.
Yeah.
And that is about joint up thinking and making, the ease of doing business. It can be difficult to move parts product through harbors and shipping and ports and incoming logistics. And it's a bit like data, when we think of data traveling from one city to the next, it's really all about the last mile. And it's a bit like traffic. We can drive at 70 miles an hour on the motorway, but once we get into the traffic zone, it gets pretty snarled up. The joint up thinking on that to embrace this and to understand the challenges of trying to build this infrastructure and what the benefits are, if that's understood at a macro level rather than a silo level, and if you have that joint up thinking, and I think we've made progress. And I think a lot of it goes down to the recognition of value and the complexity that's involved. And people are now working together to solve those complex problems, to provide that additional value, and to drive the GDP and the digital transformation.
Perfect. Gentlemen, now we have reached the end of the show. Before we go, I'd like to hear your closing remarks, 2 minutes each.
Well, from my end, what as a developer, what I would like to look at it as a collaborative effort between all the data center providers. We should not see it as a competition and rather see it as a collaborative effort, because data centers have been identified as a critical national assets, and we should have standards from the government entities and incentives to provide a better ecosystem in the market.
Yeah, I suppose to add to that, I would say that we have to not fear change. Data center
Yeah,
design has fundamentally changed probably once in the last 25 years. To add to Himmath's comment about convergence around standards, they should be both at a national level and they should be at a data center design level. That if we're trying
correct.
to design data centers with 5 different design methodologies or architecture, when you get standardization, you get simplification, you get efficiency, try and understand and how to think ahead of the curve. And then basically, I'd say with AI coming and those shifts in those semiconductors and rack densities, I'd say buckle up. This is going to be an exciting ride for the next 2 to 5 to 7 years. People think strategically and then act tactically. We can be successful all around.
A stable and clear policy and framework will achieve to reach this national digital vision of Saudi. We have UAE vision of digitization. So to meet that, we should have more supportive, unified protocols.
Yeah.
So stability,
Right.
clarity, and collaboration for digital transformation. What a wonderful note to end this podcast on. Colm Shorten, Himmath Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. And I hope to meet both of you in Dubai. As you know, we are coming to Dubai on the 11th of September this year. We are hosting our W.Media Cloud and Data Center Convention. We are hosting Interconnect World. We're also hosting our Middle East Award. So I hope to see both of you there. And thank you once again for joining us.
Yeah, my
Thank
pleasure.
you, Deborah.
Looking
It
forward
was
to it.
amazing
Thank
as
you, Deborah.
usual, and look forward to meet you in person soon.
Thank you so much. And that's a wrap. But before we go, let me quickly tell you about what's going to happen in September. We are returning to Dubai for W.Media's Dubai Cloud and Data Center Convention 2025. Alongside this, we will hold a parallel industry event called Interconnect World that is aimed at the interconnectivity ecosystem in the Middle East. We are also hosting our Middle East Awards. So this is going to be a triple feature. At this premium industry event, you can network with anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 data center and network connectivity professionals, key decision makers, experts, and veterans. To check out our agenda, to know more about how you can join us, here's how you can reach us. Write to us, check out our website. And until then, thank you so much for joining us. It's goodbye from the W.Media team. I'm Deborah Grey. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.